The session had been going well. 3 songs recorded, the band loose and playing together the way a band plays when it has found the room. Then the producer put a new piece of sheet music on the stand. He explained what he wanted. He said the label thought it was the right direction. Louis Armstrong picked up the sheet music. He read through it, set it back down on the stand, and said no. The word fell into the studio the way unexpected words do, slowly, with weight, making everyone in the room recalibrate what the rest of the afternoon was going to look like. The producer said the label wanted it. Armstrong said he understood that. The producer said it would sell. Armstrong said that might be true. The producer said that artists didn't usually get to make these decisions. Armstrong looked at him for a moment. Then he said that artists who let other people make all their decisions ended up playing things they were ashamed of for the rest of their lives. He wasn't going to be one of those artists. He put on his jacket, he thanked the musicians, and he left. The year was 1947, and the commercial landscape of American popular music was shifting in ways that created enormous pressure on every artist who had established themselves in an earlier era. The big band sound was fading. The recording industry was looking for formulas that worked in the new landscape, smaller arrangements, novelty elements, songs that could be summarized in a single phrase and understood in the first 20 seconds. Louis Armstrong had been with Decca Records since 1935. It was not always a comfortable relationship. Decca wanted Armstrong the commercial product, the recognizable voice, the trumpet, the warmth that sold records. What Decca wanted less was Armstrong the artist, with opinions about what he recorded and why. Those opinions existed whether Decca wanted them or not. The tension had been building for years before that 1947 session. Armstrong had been given material he found beneath his abilities, material designed to exploit his persona without requiring anything real from him as a musician. He had recorded some of it because the alternative was worse. In the entertainment business of that era, a black performer who developed a reputation for being difficult was a performer who quickly found that the phone stopped ringing. He had watched it happen to others. He knew the mechanism. He had been careful for a long time. But there were lines. There were things he would record and things he wouldn't. And the piece of sheet music the producer put on the stand that afternoon in 1947 landed on the wrong side of that line. The song wasn't just commercially calculated. It asked him to play a version of himself that he found degrading. Not subtle degradation, not the kind that could be rationalized, the kind that looked at itself clearly and called itself what it was. Exactly what the song was has been a matter of some historical ambiguity. The session records from that period are incomplete, and Armstrong himself was characteristically elliptical about specifics when the subject came up in later interviews. What he said consistently was that it asked him to be something he wasn't, that the performance it required was not a performance of music, but a performance of a stereotype, and that the people at the label believed he couldn't tell the difference. That was the part that stayed with him. Not that they wanted a novelty song. Novelty songs existed. Some were even good, and Armstrong had recorded his share. What bothered him was the assumption that he wouldn't notice, that the machinery around him had so thoroughly reduced him to a product that it had forgotten there was a person inside the product with eyes that could read sheet music and understand what it was asking. He noticed. He had always noticed. The song was given to another artist. It was recorded within the month, and it sold. Not enormously, it was not a transformative hit, but it sold enough that the people at Decca could point to it and say, privately, that Armstrong had made a mistake, that he had let personal pride get in the way of commercial sense. Armstrong heard the other version when it came out. He didn't comment publicly. Those who were around him at the time said he listened to it once and then didn't bring it up again. He wasn't a man who needed external validation of private decisions. He had made the decision. He knew why. That was enough. What is harder to measure is what the refusal cost him in the years immediately following. 1947 and 1948 were not the most commercially productive years of his career. The relationship with Decca remained functional but strained. There were sessions that felt perfunctory, Armstrong present, technically proficient, not entirely present in the way that made his best recordings what they were. He was navigating something that had no clean resolution. He could not change the commercial reality of the music industry in 1947. He could not make Decca into something it wasn't. What he could do, what he did, was hold the line at the specific point where compliance would have required him to become something he refused to become. Everything else he could negotiate. That he couldn't. The pivot came in 1947 itself, later that same year, when Armstrong played a concert at Carnegie Hall and then began a new phase of his career with a small group format, the All-Stars, that gave him more control over what he played and how he played it. It wasn't a clean escape from the commercial pressures, but it was a structure in which Armstrong had more room, more say, more of himself in the music that was actually performed. The recordings he made in the late 1940 seconds and early 1950 seconds with the All-Stars are still studied and still played. They have the quality that his best work always had, the sense of a musician who has chosen every note not because it was expected, but because it was right. That quality cannot be faked. You can hear when it's present and when it isn't. In the recordings from those years, it is present. He talked about the refusal once, years later, to a musician friend who asked him directly about the Decca years. Armstrong was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that the friend remembered clearly enough to repeat. "There are things you play because they asked you to. And there are things you play because they're true. I made a decision a long time ago that I wouldn't let what they asked me to crowd out what was true. Sometimes that cost me, but you can hear the difference, and I always had to live with what I recorded." You can hear the difference. He said it simply, without drama, as if it were just a fact about acoustics or musical theory. But it wasn't a fact about acoustics. It was a fact about what makes a piece of music last, about why certain recordings are still being played decades after the commercial calculation behind them has been completely forgotten, about why Louis Armstrong, who was asked repeatedly to be less than he was, produced a body of work that has outlasted every label executive who ever told him what direction to go. In 1947, in a recording studio, with a producer waiting and the machinery of the music industry fully assembled around him, Louis Armstrong looked at a piece of sheet music and put it back down on the stand. That was the whole story, and it was enough.